For over 500 years, the Galactic Council had reserved a seat for Earth. It stood at the Grand Circular Chamber, positioned among the most powerful civilizations of the galaxy. The Council Hall itself was a marvel of engineering, a construct of seamless alloys and shimmering force fields that reflected the authority of its members. Each species had a representative, some with elongated, chitinous limbs, others with translucent skin that shimmered under artificial lights. The council chamber pulsed with life, filled with voices of 100 different tongues, each merging into the humming flow of the universal translation systems. Yet, among all the noise and movement, one thing remained unchanged: the chair reserved for Earth's delegate was always empty. The absence of humanity had become an unspoken mystery, an enigma that gnawed at the minds of even the most indifferent council members. There had been countless speculations. Some believed humans had rejected the council's authority, refusing to take part in what they saw as petty interstellar politics. Others suspected that humanity, for all its power, had no interest in alliances or external affairs, content to remain within its own dominion. The more paranoid factions whispered theories of secret agendas, of hidden dealings with entities unknown to the council. And yet, the truth remained elusive. Ambassador Drekhal of the Zelvari Empire had been among the first to question humanity's silence, his species known for their keen strategic mind and thirst for order. He had spent the last decade attempting to establish diplomatic contact with Earth, but every envoy sent to their home system returned with the same message: humanity had no interest in occupying its seat. This did not sit well with him. No species, no matter how powerful, ignored the Galactic Council unless they had something to hide. One evening, after yet another failed attempt to summon a representative from Earth, Drekhal stood before the vacant seat and addressed the council. His voice, deep and calculated, carried through the chamber with the weight of unspoken frustration. For 5 centuries, we have waited. We have extended invitations, sent emissaries, offered treaties. And yet, the humans refuse to join us. I ask you, fellow council members, what does it say about us if we continue to entertain this silence? Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Ambassador Elvith of the Kryn Dominion, a reptilian being with shimmering emerald scales, narrowed his golden eyes. Perhaps it is not silence, Drekhal, he said with a slow, deliberate cadence. Perhaps it is something we fail to understand. From across the room, High Chancellor Vena of the Orankai, one of the council's oldest and most revered members, leaned forward in her seat. Her species, known for their nearly boundless intellect, had been among the first to interact with humanity. She had never spoken of their encounters, yet there was an unusual wariness in her gaze. Have you ever asked yourself, she said, her voice soft yet carrying an undeniable authority, why humans were offered a seat in the first place? The room fell into an uneasy silence. It was true. Unlike other civilizations, which had to petition for a place within the council, humanity had been given one without debate, without challenge. The Council had extended the invitation not long after Earth had demonstrated its capability for interstellar travel. At the time, many had assumed it was a formality, a gesture meant to welcome a new, promising species into the fold. But now, centuries later, with humanity's consistent refusal to participate, the question had resurfaced with renewed urgency. Drekhal clenched his jaw. You speak in riddles, Chancellor, he said, his patience thinning. If there is something to be said, then say it. Vena's gaze lingered on the empty chair for a long moment before she finally spoke. I have lived long enough to witness the rise and fall of civilizations. I have seen species claw their way from the darkness of their homeworlds into the vast reaches of the cosmos. And yet, I have never seen a species quite like the humans. Elvitha's forked tongue flicked out slightly, a sign of his curiosity. What do you mean? Vena exhaled slowly, choosing her words with care. We assume they refuse to take their seat because they do not wish to be involved. That is incorrect. They do not sit with us because they know something we do not. Drekhal frowned, his ridged brow furrowing. And what, exactly, do they know? Vena did not answer immediately. Instead, she reached forward, tapping a command into the console embedded in her podium. The room's central display flickered to life, revealing a series of transmissions, communications that had been intercepted over the centuries from the human homeworld. Some were distorted, filled with static. Others were clear, crisp, but equally unnerving. They were warnings. Do not come here. Do not look too closely. There are things older than us watching. The murmurs of the council turned to uneasy whispers. Some leaned forward, studying the transmissions with growing apprehension. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Elvitha's claws tightened against the metal of his podium. This is absurd," he muttered. "Are you telling me that humanity, one of the most advanced civilizations in this galaxy, chooses isolation because they are afraid?" Vena's lips pressed into a thin line. "No," she said simply. "Not afraid. Aware." The weight of that single word sent a chill through the room. Drekal shook his head, unwilling to accept the implications. "These are meaningless ramblings," he said, though his voice lacked the conviction it once held. "Superstitions, nothing more." Vena turned her gaze toward him, and for the first time in his life, he saw something in her eyes that unsettled him. It was not fear, nor was it uncertainty. It was understanding. "You assume the chair is empty because humanity refuses to sit," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But what if I told you that it is empty because something else is already sitting there?" A cold silence fell over the chamber. No one spoke. No one moved. And for the first time, the Galactic Council understood that Earth's absence was not an act of defiance. It was a warning. The decision to investigate Earth further had not been made lightly. After the unsettling implications raised in the council chamber, unease spread among its members like a silent contagion. Yet, despite the growing apprehension, curiosity prevailed. The Galactic Council was not an institution built on fear. It thrived on knowledge, on discovery, on the pursuit of truth. If humanity truly harbored a secret, one so profound that it kept them isolated from the rest of the galaxy, then it was the duty of the Council to uncover it. Ambassador Drekal, his mind still reeling from Chancellor Vena's cryptic words, took it upon himself to seek answers. He was not a being prone to superstition. His empire had conquered entire systems, subjugated warlike species, and bent chaotic regions of space into ordered sectors of governance. Fear was an alien concept to him. And yet, as he stood before the Council's intelligence division, listening to reports of those who had dared to approach Earth without permission, he found himself gripping the edges of his seat a little too tightly. "Most expeditions return with nothing," said the lead investigator, a stern-faced woman from the Orankai delegation. "Either their vessels are forced to retreat by the humans themselves, or they suffer unexplained malfunctions." She tapped on a control panel, bringing up a collection of grainy recordings. Some showed static-filled distress signals, others captured the final transmissions of ships that had vanished without a trace. The voices of the lost played through the chamber, fragmented and filled with desperation. "Something's wrong. We're losing control of the shadows, moving against the stars. I swear something is watching. This isn't interference. This is something else." Then silence. Drekal frowned as he leaned forward, studying the data. "And those who return?" he asked. The investigator hesitated before responding. "Most refuse to speak of what they saw. Some have taken extreme measures to ensure they never will." A chill crept up Drekal's spine, though he refused to acknowledge it. "Elaborate." The woman's expression darkened. "There have been incidents. Crew members abandoning their posts. Officers resigning with no explanation. A few." She exhaled slowly. "A few have taken their own lives. No common pattern. No clear reason. Just a deep, unshakable certainty that they saw something they were never meant to see." The ambassador clenched his jaw, willing himself to remain unfazed. "And what do the humans say?" "The same thing they always say." She turned to him, her gaze sharp and unreadable. "Do not look too closely." The words lingered in the air, heavy with meaning. Drekal had heard enough. It was one thing to speculate from the comfort of the council chambers, but speculation was not proof. He was not a man who cowered before the unknown. If there was something lurking behind humanity's isolation, he would uncover it himself. Without hesitation, he authorized a covert expedition. The ship designated for the mission was the Rinvalis, a state-of-the-art reconnaissance vessel equipped with the finest stealth technology the Zelvari Empire had to offer. Its crew consisted of elite operatives, hand-picked for their ability to observe, analyze, and, if necessary, adapt to unforeseen circumstances. They had been given strict orders: approach Earth, gather intelligence, and return without engaging in direct contact. As the Rinvalis neared the Sol system, everything appeared normal at first. Earth rotated below them, its blue oceans and sprawling continents illuminated by the distant sun. The human settlements were visible even from orbit, their sprawling megacities pulsing with artificial light. Space stations hovered above the planet like silent sentinels, monitoring traffic, enforcing the strict perimeter the humans had established around their homeworld. It was almost disappointing. For all the ominous warnings and fearful whispers, the planet seemed ordinary. The ship maintained a safe distance, deploying a series of long-range probes to collect data. The crew worked in efficient silence, their instruments scanning for anomalies, their systems calibrated to detect any irregularities. At first, there was nothing. No distortions, no energy readings beyond the expected. Just Earth and its people, going about their lives, oblivious to the watchful eyes above. Then the errors began. Small at first. Glitches in the sensor arrays. Minor disruptions in communication channels. The chief systems officer dismissed them as routine interferences, until the malfunctions worsened. Screens flickered. Instruments displayed conflicting data. The AI systems, designed to process incoming information with flawless precision, began producing nonsensical outputs. Unable to process data. Error. Error. Recalibrating. Drekal, monitoring the situation from the command center, scowled. Status report, he demanded. The chief officer's hands flew over the controls, attempting to stabilize the systems. "We're receiving an influx of unidentifiable data streams," he said, his voice tight with confusion. "It's almost as if something is rewriting our parameters in real time." Drekal narrowed his eyes. "Clarify." The officer hesitated before answering. "I don't know how to explain it, sir. It's like our instruments are seeing something that shouldn't exist." A cold sensation settled in Drekal's chest. Before he could issue new orders, the ship's lights dimmed. A deep, resonant hum vibrated through the hull, as if the very fabric of space had shifted around them. The crew stiffened, their gazes snapping toward the main viewport. Outside, the stars flickered unnaturally. For a brief, horrifying moment, they seemed to move. Drekal rose from his seat, his pulse pounding. "Confirm visual feed." One of the officers scrambled to comply, adjusting the external cameras. The display sharpened, focusing on the space beyond Earth's orbit. At first, there was nothing. Then, ever so slowly, something began to take shape. Not an object. Not a ship. A presence. It was impossible to describe. It did not have form, nor did it exist in any conventional sense. It was like a shadow cast against the void, yet not a shadow at all. It was absence, a void within a void, something that should not be perceived yet undeniably was. It lingered at the edge of awareness, slipping through the cracks of understanding, refusing to be fully seen yet making itself known all the same. One of the crew members let out a strangled gasp, his hands trembling as he gripped the console. "Sir," he whispered, his voice hoarse with dread. "It's looking at us." Drekal did not ask how he knew. Because he felt it too. Something else had noticed them. Something that should never have been noticed. The moment stretched into eternity, the weight of unseen eyes pressing down on them like an unspoken threat. Then, without warning, the ship's systems crashed completely. The lights died. The engines failed. The artificial gravity flickered. And in the suffocating darkness of the command center, only one thing remained. A message. Not in human language. Not in any language known to the Council. Yet, somehow, every single person on board understood it. "You should not have looked." Drekal barely had time to react before the ship's emergency protocols reactivated, flinging the Rinvalis into an automated retreat. The engines roared to life, the navigation systems overriding manual control. The last thing anyone saw before the ship was hurled away from the Sol system was the silent, unmoving planet below. Earth remained unchanged. But Drekal knew, with absolute certainty, that something had seen them. And it had let them go. Drekal sat in the dimly lit council chamber, his hands clenched into fists as he stared at the holographic projection before him. The Rinvalis had returned, but it was not the same ship that had left. The vessel's data logs were corrupted, the recordings fragmented, and the crew, those who had survived, were silent, their expressions hollow, their gazes distant. No matter how much he demanded answers, no one could explain what had happened. They all uttered the same chilling phrase. "We should not have looked." The phrase had echoed in his mind ever since the expedition's return. It haunted his thoughts, slipping into his dreams, twisting into something deeper than fear, something that gnawed at the very fabric of his understanding. He had spent his entire career navigating the complexities of diplomacy, war, and interstellar politics. He had negotiated peace between warring factions, crushed rebellions, and witnessed the collapse of entire civilizations. Yet, nothing had ever left him feeling as helpless as this. He turned to the lead investigator, the Orankai woman who had first warned him of the expeditions gone wrong. She stood beside him, her arms crossed tightly, her expression unreadable. "You were right," he admitted, his voice strained. "Something is happening on Earth. Something we do not understand." She did not gloat, nor did she offer empty reassurances. Instead, she simply nodded. "And now you know why we stopped sending expeditions." Drekal exhaled sharply. "But we still don't know what it is." The investigator hesitated before responding. "No," she said quietly. "But someone does." His gaze snapped to her, sharp with sudden interest. "Who?" She tapped a few commands into the console, bringing up a classified report. The screen flickered before displaying the image of a being, tall, cloaked in ceremonial robes, his face marked with the distinct geometric tattoos of the Orankai priesthood. Drekal frowned. The priesthood rarely involved itself in matters of the Galactic Council, preferring to remain in the shadows of history, observing rather than influencing. If one of them had taken interest in Earth, it meant something deeper was at play. The investigator's voice was hushed, almost reluctant. "His name is Eldrin Varesh. He was part of the first Orankai delegation to Earth nearly 2 centuries ago. When he returned, he renounced his title, abandoned all ties to the Council, and disappeared. The last record of him places him on an isolated moon in the Kalvari system. No one knows why he left, but those who spoke to him before his departure say he was changed." Drekal didn't hesitate. "I want to speak with him." The journey to Kalvaris was uneventful, but the atmosphere upon arrival was anything but. The moon was barren, its surface scarred by ancient meteor impacts, its skies clouded with an ever-present storm of ionized dust. The facility that housed Eldrin Varesh was a stark, brutalist structure, its walls reinforced with alloys designed to withstand both time and intrusion. It was not a prison, but it might as well have been. The guards did not question Drekal's arrival. They simply led him through the corridors without a word, their expressions grim, their movements precise. When they reached Varesh's chamber, the doors slid open with a whisper, revealing a dimly lit room filled with the scent of burning incense. Varesh sat in the center, his posture rigid, his hands resting on his knees. His eyes, though old, burned with an intensity that unsettled Drekal more than he cared to admit. The priest did not look up as he spoke. "You have seen it, haven't you?" Drekal stepped forward, his jaw tightening. "I don't know what I saw." Varesh finally lifted his gaze, locking eyes with the ambassador. "That is a lie." The silence that followed was suffocating. Drekal exhaled slowly, willing himself to maintain his composure. "Then tell me what I saw." Varesh studied him for a long moment before rising to his feet. He moved with an eerie stillness, as if each motion was deliberate, calculated. He walked to a small alcove in the wall, retrieving a simple metallic disc before returning to stand before the ambassador. "This," Varesh said, holding out the disc, "is the last surviving record of the Orankai delegation's encounter with Earth." Drekal hesitated before taking it. The disc was cool to the touch, deceptively ordinary. Varesh watched him closely. "Understand this, ambassador. Once you see what is on that recording, you will never be the same. You will never think of the universe the same way again." Drekal met his gaze, unflinching. "Show me." Varesh nodded and gestured toward a console embedded in the chamber's far wall. Drekal inserted the disc, watching as the screen flickered to life. The recording was old, the quality degraded, but the visuals were clear enough. At first, it showed the Orankai delegation standing on Earth, their robes pristine, their expressions serene. They spoke with human officials, exchanged formalities, engaged in diplomatic pleasantries. Then the footage shifted. The humans led the delegation to a secluded location, an underground chamber hidden beneath one of their cities. The walls were lined with ancient carvings, symbols that did not belong to any known language. The air in the recording seemed thicker, heavier, as if the very atmosphere resisted being documented. Then the lights flickered. The footage became erratic, the screen distorting with bursts of static. Shadows moved where no shadows should have been. Shapes that did not belong to any living species shifted within the frame, appearing and disappearing in the span of a single breath. The delegates began to panic, their measured composure unraveling as the impossible unfolded before them. And then, a voice. Not from the humans. Not from the Orankai. From something else. You were not meant to see. The transmission ended abruptly. Drekal stared at the blank screen, his mind racing. He had expected horror, had braced himself for the unknown, but this was something beyond comprehension. Varesh's voice was barely a whisper. Do you understand now? Drekal's throat was dry. What was that? Varesh's expression was unreadable. Something older than us. Something older than humanity. It was never meant to be found. But the humans found it. Drekal shook his head, his pulse pounding. And they still live there. Varesh exhaled, a slow, measured breath. They do not fear it. Because they know that as long as they remain, it will never leave. Drekal felt his stomach twist. Are you saying they are keeping it there? Varesh met his gaze. I am saying that the only reason it has not turned its gaze upon the rest of us is because Earth is its prison. And humanity is its warden. The words settled over Drekal like a crushing weight. The seat had never been empty because humans refused to join the council. It was empty because they were already guarding something far more important. Drekal left the desolate moon of Kalvaris with a weight upon his mind heavier than any political burden he had ever carried. The truth, as Varesh had revealed it, defied everything he understood about the natural order of the universe. The implications were terrifying, not just for humanity, but for the entire Galactic Council. If what the Orankai priest had said was true, then Earth was not a planet to be ignored or studied. It was a boundary, a containment field for something vast, something unknowable. As his vessel traversed the silent corridors of space, he reviewed the recording again and again, hoping to extract some overlooked detail, some flaw that would reveal this to be an elaborate deception. But the more he watched, the more he realized there was nothing flawed about what he had seen. It was not a fabrication. It was a warning. Upon his return to the capital world of the Council, he wasted no time in calling for an emergency session. The highest-ranking ambassadors and officials gathered, their faces filled with confusion and concern. Whispers filled the chamber, but all fell silent the moment he stepped forward. His reputation preceded him. He was not known for alarmism. If he had summoned them under such urgency, then the matter was of grave importance. He did not waste time with pleasantries. We have been asking the wrong question, he said, his voice steady, though his mind churned with unease. For centuries, we have speculated on why humanity refuses to take its seat. We have debated their motives, their arrogance, their disinterest. But the truth is far more terrifying. He gestured toward the projection system, and the recording from Varesh's archive played for the council. The room remained silent as the footage unfolded, the calm diplomacy, the descent into the underground chamber, the flickering lights, the presence that moved unseen, the final, incomprehensible whisper. When the screen darkened, no one spoke. The weight of what they had witnessed settled upon them like a suffocating shroud. Chancellor Vena, who had remained silent throughout, finally leaned forward, her expression unreadable. What do you propose we do, Ambassador? Drekal met her gaze. We must enact a silent accord, he said. From this day forward, Earth is to be declared untouchable. No further attempts to contact humanity will be made. No ships will approach their borders. No discussions of their involvement in the Council will ever be raised again. Murmurs of unease spread through the chamber. Some, like Ambassador Elveth, wore expressions of skepticism. Others looked unsettled, their gazes darting toward one another as if hoping for someone to challenge his words. Finally, Elveth spoke. You expect us to simply turn away? To ignore an entire species? His tone carried an edge of disbelief. That is not how the Council operates. Drekal's jaw tightened. Then tell me, Elveth, he said slowly, deliberately, what do you suggest? That we confront the humans? Demand answers. Force them to speak of something they have spent centuries keeping contained. Elveth hesitated. Drekal pressed on. We saw what happened to those who went looking. We saw what happened to those who strayed too close. Do you think our fates would be any different? Vena watched him closely, her fingers steepled beneath her chin. You believe humanity is shielding the rest of us? He nodded. I do. Silence settled over the chamber. The weight of his words was undeniable. If humanity was truly acting as a barrier between the Council and whatever it was that lurked beneath the surface of their world, then any interference, even well-intentioned, could be catastrophic. Vena exhaled slowly. And if humanity ever fails? Drekal did not answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower, almost grim. Then we will not have time to regret our ignorance. The vote was unanimous. The declaration was drafted with careful precision, its wording designed to avoid unnecessary attention. Publicly, it would state that Earth had chosen a path of isolation, and that the Council respected their decision. Privately, it was understood that Earth was now a restricted world, one that would remain untouched, unquestioned, undisturbed. The diplomatic archives were purged of all records relating to humanity's absence. Official documents were rewritten to ensure that no future ambassador would attempt to revisit the issue. As far as history was concerned, Earth had never been invited to the Council in the first place. Only those within the highest echelons of power knew the truth. They carried it like a quiet dread, a knowledge that could never be spoken aloud. For centuries, the Galactic Council had been the guiding force of interstellar civilization, making decisions that shaped the fate of entire species. But now, for the first time in its long and storied history, it had made a decision not based on strategy, not based on diplomacy, but on fear. No official orders were given to enforce the silence. None were needed. The message had already spread among the stars, passed down through whispers and unspoken agreements. Stay away from Earth. Do not look too closely. And whatever happens, whatever fate befalls humanity, pray that their seat remains empty. Years passed. The silent pact remained unbroken. The Galactic Council never spoke of Earth's absence again, and those who once questioned humanity's motives for remaining distant learned to suppress their curiosity. It was an unspoken rule now, one that did not require enforcement, because those who dared to challenge it found themselves paralyzed by something deeper than logic. Fear. Drekal carried that fear with him long after the emergency session had concluded. He had once been a man of certainty, of reason, but that certainty had been shattered in the wake of the truth. No official records remained of what he had uncovered. No historical accounts would ever mention the silent resolution that had been reached. Yet, across the galaxy, the consequences of that decision echoed in ways unseen but deeply felt. Trade routes that had once passed near the Sol system were quietly adjusted, avoiding the region entirely. Military fleets mapped their patrols to keep their distance, citing fabricated bureaucratic concerns. Even independent explorers, those reckless souls who lived to defy boundaries, seemed to develop a subconscious hesitation when the name Earth was spoken. The silence around humanity's isolation was absolute. And then, something changed. It began with a distress signal. A routine patrol vessel from the Kryn Dominion, operating along the outer edges of the Orion Arm, intercepted an automated transmission. The signal was faint, fragmented by interference, but the message was clear. It came from a human station. Drekal was among the first to be informed. The moment he saw the decrypted message, an icy dread settled in his chest. Containment compromised. Requesting immediate reinforcement. There were no further details, no signs of conflict, no indications of what had transpired. Just those few words, repeating over and over in the eerie monotony of automated distress protocols. The Council reacted swiftly, though not in the way it once might have. No emergency meetings were called. No debates were held over whether to intervene. The response was uniform, as if rehearsed in the depths of their subconscious fears. No one would answer the distress call. Ships were ordered to turn away. Any transmissions from Earth or its colonies were to be ignored. The Council, in all its wisdom and authority, chose to do nothing. Drekal knew why. If something had happened to humanity, if their vigilance had failed, then no fleet, no alliance, no force in the galaxy could change what came next. The only course of action left was to hope that whatever had been contained remained bound to its prison. But hope, he knew, was a fragile thing. Years passed. The distress signal eventually faded, overtaken by the background radiation of deep space. No ships emerged from Earth's system. No further transmissions were received. Humanity did not reach out again. To some, it was a relief. To others, it was something far worse. Because the galaxy had grown used to Earth's silence. But never before had that silence felt so final. Some nights, Drek'el found himself staring at the holographic star maps in his private chambers, his gaze drawn inevitably to the small, unmarked space where the Sol system lay. He knew he would never go there again. No one would. And yet, he could not shake the feeling that something was still watching. The seat at the council remained empty. It always would. But now, it was no longer a question of why humanity had refused to sit among them. Now, the only question that mattered was whether the thing they had been keeping at bay had finally noticed that its wardens were gone.